The mud covered what the orders couldn't. What they told us to do was already inhuman, but what we found buried there was older than any war. We dug too deep, but not into earth. They told us we were moving forward. That was the phrase they used, forward, like there was still such a direction left in this war, as if anything ahead of us wasn't already soaked in blood, shellfire, and madness. But orders were orders, and mud didn't care where it swallowed you, forward, backward. It all ended in the same wet grave. It was November 1917. The sun was quiet, or as quiet as a place that never truly stopped screaming can be. We'd lost too many men. The French had pulled back from the eastern sector near Les Batches Terres, said the terrain was unstable, said the trenches collapsed on themselves, said it was unsound. What they didn't say, what they never wrote in the reports, was that some of their men came back without their memories. Some came back without their own voices, and some never came back at all. Command told us we were to secure and reinforce a forward listening post previously held by Allied forces. Translation: move into the trench the French abandoned, and sit in the dark. Listen, observe, don't ask questions. I was 23, half my teeth were rotting. My right knee popped when I crouched, and I still thought war was about borders. By the end of the week, I learned war is about what you're willing to bury and what refuses to stay buried. We moved out under a sky like wet slate. 8 of us, no officers, just Sergeant Calloway, myself, and 6 others whose faces I can still see, even now, even in my sleep. Murray, the radio man, stuttered when he prayed. Harker, the sapper, loved poetry, pized like he was already dead. Kit Davies, always cold, always quiet. Finch, the joker, the loud one. Webb, the youngest, barely 18, still wrote letters to his mom every night. We arrived at the trench around 0300. The fog hung low, pressing against our lungs. The whole place smelled wrong, not like corpses that we knew. This was older. It's like stone and rust and something that had been asleep too long. The French had left in a hurry. Supplies were scattered. A field stove still warm. Boot prints all facing away, but no blood, no signs of fighting. No sign of the enemy, just a hole, a deep one, not a shell crater, not a dugout, a vertical shaft dug by hand, reinforced with beams French engineering, descending straight into the earth, too neat, too deliberate. There were symbols carved into the wood, triangles within circles, spirals broken at one edge, a few still wet with black paint. Harker, the sapper, muttered something in Welsh. The sergeant told him to shut it. We should have shut the shaft instead, but orders were orders. The first night, we posted watches. Murray couldn't get the radio to hold signal. Kept getting strange feedback, not static, but patterns, rhythmic, low, like breathing. When he adjusted the frequency, it started repeating a phrase in Morse, dot dash, dot 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 dot. Are you the match? Murray turned pale, turned it off, said it was interference, said it must have been a loop from a German set, but we all heard it, and it played again every night just before sleep took us. Even with the radio off, on the third night, Webb disappeared, left his rifle, left his boots. The mud where he'd been sleeping had no footprints. Sink, like something had pulled him straight down, like the trench floor had swallowed him whole. The sergeant wrote it up as desertion, but none of us believed that Webb was young. But he wasn't stupid, and he'd been changing, quiet, talking in his sleep, repeating that Morse phrase again and again. Are you the match? Are you the match? The hole, the shaft started to smell. We covered it. Then the tarp caught. Fire, no flame, just smoldered from the center outward. Harker swore he heard voices coming from it, so they weren't speaking any language he knew. But he understood them. We told him to sleep. That was the last night he spoke. The next day, he tore out his own tongue. We radioed for extraction. No reply, only static, and behind it, that signal. Morse. Slower now. Do not leave. Finch tried to leave anyway. Took a flare gun, ran east. We watched the fog take him. 10 minutes later, he returned, but it wasn't him. He looked the same, smelled of smoke, but he didn't speak. Stood in the corner of the trench, staring at the shaft, eyes red, mouth open, breathing out smoke. The sergeant ordered us to restrain him. That night, Finch burned from the inside. No sound, just smoke, rising from his mouth, his nose, his eyes, until there was nothing left but a husk, and that same spiral carved into his chest. I should have run, but where? Every direction was fog. Every step sank deeper, even the trench. Walls pulsed like veins, and the ground whispered when we slept, not in words, in memories, but they weren't ours. That's when I knew this wasn't a battle line. It was a mouth, and someone, years ago, had dug into its teeth, and now it was chewing its way out. We stopped digging, but it didn't. We stopped digging on the 5th day, not because we were told to, not because of fatigue, but because the ground started breathing back. I don't know how else to say it. The earth around us began to swell and contract, slowly, rhythmically, like lungs buried beneath mud and blood. We dropped our shovels. We stood there, knee-deep in filth, trying to understand if it was the cold playing tricks on our bones, or if the war had finally pushed us beyond reality. But then the shaft, the one we tried to seal, let out a sound. Not a scream, not an explosion, not even human, just long exhale, and the air turned warm. We reported all of it, the disappearances, the fire that burned without flame. The trench whispering in code. Command responded with a single transmission: hold the line, reinforcements en route. But no one came, not for 2 days, no. And by then, we weren't a unit anymore. We were 7 versions of the same fever dream. Bell tried to take control after the sergeant went blind. Yes, blind. He woke up screaming, clawing at his own eyes, said he saw light in the dark, said the shaft had opened wider in his sleep. We checked. It had, by 6 inches, wider, without digging, without tools. The dirt moved on its own, or something beneath it was making room. Murray stopped praying, started repeating the signal out loud. Even when the radio was dead, he'd sit by the receiver, lips moving, eyes unfocused, saying, "You are the match. You are the match. You are the match," over and over, until one night, the radio clicked back on by itself and repeated his voice, his exact voice, same tone, same rhythm, but he wasn't speaking anymore. He'd gone silent, and the machine finished the sentence, "You are the fire now." Then the static returned. Davies disappeared during watch. We didn't find his body, but his coat was folded neatly next to the shaft, and in his pocket a journal, one he never wrote in before. Inside, drawings, spirals, symbols, coordinates, and a map, not of the trench, not of the region, but of something beneath, a structure, buried, wide, made of concentric rings and hallways that seemed to shift depending on the angle you looked, and in the center, a single word, stern, fewer, double quotes, German. It meant Starfire, alas. The first time I felt true terror, not because of the drawing, not because of the word, but because I had dreamed of that exact structure the night before. And don't speak German. Harker, even without a tongue, began scratching that word into the trench walls with his fingernails, over and over, until his fingers bled. We tried to stop him, but he wouldn't stop, even after he collapsed, even after his breathing slowed, Even after the mud swallowed his legs up to the knees, we never saw his eyes again. Just mud and movement. Bell vanished next. He had stared too long into the shaft, said he saw something move at the bottom, said it was wearing his father's uniform. He laughed for hours before walking into the fog barefoot. We didn't go after him. Only 3 of us were left, me, Murray, and Finch, or what was left of Finch. But even he had begun to speak again, only backwards, words like Colonelect and Rouquaire. I wrote them down. They didn't mean anything at the time. Now I know. Colonelect, Corlight, Rouquaire, return. Return of what? That night, the shaft opened fully. We didn't open it. It opened for us. The cover was gone. The supports were split outward. And from the darkness below came not air, but light, soft, white gold, and full of a sound that wasn't music, but could have been a pulse, a welcome, and behind it, footsteps climbing. Murray lost his mind, ran toward it, yelling something I couldn't understand. He stopped at the edge, stared down, and whispered, "They're us," but from before. Then he jumped. I was alone, and the trench was no longer quiet. It was listening, and I realized we hadn't dug into the earth. We had dug into a memory, one the ground itself had been trying to forget, and now it wanted me to remember it too. Something came back wearing his voice. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of dreams. I was afraid of hearing his voice again, because Murray didn't die, at least not in the way you'd expect. He jumped into that shaft. Body vanished. His scream was swallowed before it could echo, and yet hours later his voice returned, not from below, not from memory, but from the radio. It clicked on by itself. No power, no frequency, just his voice. "John," the tone. "It's warm down here. I found it." We were supposed to remember. And then a sound, wet, rhythmic, like breathing through lungs made of rope, and the unmistakable snap of bone turning itself inside out. Then silence, and after a few seconds, "You are the match." I threw the radio against the wall. It still spoke by morning. The trench had changed. The ground was no longer mud, not entirely. It had a texture, slick, dark, pulsing, like veins running through meat, and it moved, slowly, yes, but visibly following me, as if the trench itself had become interested. I tried to climb out. Every ledge collapsed under my hands. Every step forward took me back. The fog never lifted, and the sky was the color of old ash. I marked my position with my knife. Walked for 15 minutes. Found the same mark again. I wasn't in France anymore. I was in whatever the earth becomes when memory curdles. That night, someone entered the trench. Not from the shaft, from the other side. I heard footsteps, squishing, deliberate. I called out. No answer. I raised my rifle, turned the corner, and saw Finch alive or something wearing his shape. His face was intact, mostly, eyes a little too wide. Smile to calm and in his hand, his notebook, the one that had burned in his lap days before. He held it out to me, didn't speak, but his mouth moved, soundlessly, like playback without audio. Then, suddenly, his voice filled the air, from every direction at once, not from his throat, but from the trench itself. "You left it open. Now it remembers. We are the ashes that learned to walk." I fired 3 rounds, straight through his chest. He collapsed. His body turned to mud, not metaphorically. His skin broke like old paper, His spine unspooled like wet rope, and what remained was mud, thick, dark, moving on its own. It crawled back toward the shaft. The radio turned on again. Murray's voice, this time chanting coordinates, not in English, not in French, in numbers I had never learned, but understood. They weren't locations, they were layers, depth, descent, time each, coordinate a marker of how far into memory we had dug. And the final one was my name. Then I heard the breathing again, but this time not from the shaft, not from the radio, from behind me, slow, calm, familiar. I turned. The sergeant was back, blind, bleeding from the eyes, smiling, and behind him. The trench was no longer a line. It was a circle, a spiral, and at the center, a heartbeat. They were never building fortifications here. They were building a door, and we had opened it, not with explosives, not with shovels, with orders. And now, something had stepped through, wearing our uniforms, our voices, our names, but not our souls. The mud started remembering names. Mud used to be just mud, a curse under your boots, a weight in your clothes, a thief of movement, warmth, and sanity. But now, the mud was something else. It had a memory, and it had begun to use it. I saw it the morning after the trench changed shape again. Yes, again, it was no longer a corridor, not a spiral. Now, it was a sequence of chambers, narrow, ribbed, veined, up. Walls pulsed, floor breathed, and in the center of each new chamber, a name carved into the dirt. Names I hadn't spoken in years. Names from my childhood, my schoolmates, my brother, even the dog I buried when I was 11. I dropped to my knees, touched one of the carvings. The mud felt warm, not sun-warm, body-warm, like it had been written from inside her throat. The radio had gone silent, but now the mud was speaking, not in words, in pulls. You'd take a step, and it would shift, not to resist, to guide. I followed it. I don't know why. I wasn't thinking anymore, or maybe I was thinking for it. The tunnel narrowed. The walls pressed closer. I had to crawl, every few meters, a name. Every name, someone I had forgotten, or tried to. And then I saw my own dot, not Ashford, not Private. Jonathan, scrawled by a trembling hand. Or maybe a memory dot below it, a phrase etched deep, which you bury, still grows. I don't remember screaming, but my throat hurt. 4 hours after. Then I heard him again, Murray, but not from the radio, from the tunnel ahead. He was singing a lullaby we'd sung to keep warm the night before. Sfinch burned, but the words were different, backwards, bent, inverted somehow. And as I crawled forward, the air changed from dirt to static, from static to light. Yes, light. It wasn't fire. It wasn't electric. It was memory turned visible, flickering like a slideshow made of regrets. I saw Webb, smiling, then crying, then walking into fog with arms open wide. I saw Harker before he lost his tongue, praying, then bleeding, then scratching triangles into his skin. I saw my mother in a kitchen that never existed, wearing a dress she never owned, smiling a smile I had never seen but missed deeply. And then I saw myself, but older, worn, alone, writing this. The light vanished. I was back in the trench, but the names were gone, all but one. The final name burned into the floor. Something black and oily. Sternfeuer. I felt it before I saw it. Vibration. In the mud. In my teeth. In my thoughts. It was no longer waiting. It was coming up. Not with malice. With purpose. It had found its match. And now it wanted fire. And I was the last one holding it. The first. Fire wasn't lit. It was remembered. You'd think fire starts with friction. A match. A spark. An ignition. But not this fire. Not the one under our feet. Not the one I've felt inside my chest ever since the trench swallowed Murray. This fire didn't start. It turned. It didn't spread. It recalled. It didn't burn. Spoke. I've begun losing time. Moments blink out. Memories overlap. I'll find myself writing something and not remember where I got the ink, or standing over the shaft again, hand trembling, convinced I've never left it. But the worst part, things are coming back to me that I never lived. Scenes, wounds, orders, in languages I don't speak, but understand. A child's voice whispering numbers that controlled temperature and distance. A word spoken over a radio in 2 places at once. And I face my own, wearing a uniform that isn't mine. I'm not the only one down here anymore. I don't mean the others. I mean me, versions of me, fragments, walking the trench from other directions, looking older or younger or wrong. I tried talking to one. He just pointed to the mud and whispered, "It remembers the fire you buried." Then he pulled his own teeth out, all of them, placed them in my hand, smiled, vanished. The fire returned that night. Not outside, inside. I felt it in my lungs first, breathing heat. Each inhale, a memory that wasn't mine. Each exhale, a word I never learned. I coughed blood, then ash, then something else, a tooth, not mine. I checked. It had writing carved into it, property of Operation Marrow. I'd never heard of that operation until I checked the dog tag I forgot I wore. Marrow Unit Observer Class. They never told me, never trained me. I wasn't a soldier. I was an antenna, a conduit, something to carry the flame forward after it had no more tongues to cling to. They sent us here to hold the line. But we weren't reinforcements. We were sacrifices, anchors that the spiral is back. Not in the trench this time, in my skin, raised, burning. I traced it in the mirror shard I carry. When I blinked, saw the trench from above, and it wasn't a trench. It was a sigil laid into the land, a glyph only visible in death. In the shaft, it was the eye. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a ritual ground, built long before the war, before uniforms, before bullets, and we were the latest offering. The fire wasn't lit. It was remembered, and every death here, every scream, every word scratched into steel or skin was fuel for what comes next, because now the mud is hot again, and the trench is smiling. The uniform was never ours. I still wear the uniform, even now. What's left of it? Buttons melted, fabric fused to skin in places, mud in every fold, every pocket, every hollow. But I've begun to realize something. This uniform was never mine. I found a photograph yesterday, stuffed into the lining of my rucksack, water-stained, torn, but visible. 8 men standing at the mouth of a trench. Same layout as ours, same shaft in the background, but the date scratched on the back, November 1871. 70 years before we arrived. In every face, every single one was familiar. I don't mean they looked like people I knew. I mean they were us, me, Murray, Harker, Finch. Same eyes, same crooked jawlines. Same crooked jawlines. Same scar above my lip. Even the same badge Royal Fusiliers. Same battalion number. Same unit code. But the caption said Marrow Unit, Cycle 3. Cycle. I whispered the word for hours. It felt sticky on my tongue, like it wasn't made to be said by a throat like mine. And yet, it fit. We weren't the first, and we wouldn't be the last. Because this wasn't a battle. This was a loop. A summoning ritual disguised as war. The uniforms, the weapons, the ranks, it's all part of the pattern. Just like the trench. Just like the mud. Just like the shaft. I started inspecting the clothing again. Each of our jackets had a small inner seam, invisible unless you tore it open. Inside, mine was something flat, metal, burned black. A plate, not a dog tag, an ID badge, inscribed in tiny lettering. Phase 12, marrow, core receiver. Frequency seated. July 19th, 1914. Trigger word, stern foyer, stern foyer. Again, it always comes back to that word. I don't know what it is. A name, a location, a code, or maybe it's none of those. Maybe it's a command. Finch spoke it in his sleep. Harker carved it into his skin. And now, I hear it every time the wind moves through the trench. Not shouted, not whispered, recited. The mud doesn't stick to me anymore. It wraps around me, cradles, moves when I do. I stepped outside the trench perimeter today, just once, and the fog parted from me, like it recognized its own. I think I'm becoming something else, not possessed, not insane. Prepared the fire beneath this trench. Doesn't need more bodies. It needs memory vessels. People who've been cracked just right, who've seen too much, buried too much. Broken in precise ways so that they don't leak till it spots. Time, and I think my time is coming. I've begun hearing key footsteps again, not from behind, from beneath, slow, measured, marching upward, like a regiment rising through history, like uniforms remembering the men who wore them, like names remembering the mouths that spoke them. And when I lie still, I feel something warm against my chest, a heartbeat, but not mine. They never wanted us to survive. They wanted us to wear the shape of those who didn't, to carry the fire through generations, like torches passed in the dark. The uniform was never ours. We were just its latest fit. In the trench, it isn't a line in the war. It's a signature, and someone, something, is getting ready to sign again. The ground isn't holding us. It's listening. I used to think the ground was something you escaped from. You fell in it. You dug through it. You died under it. It was final. It was below. It was something you conquered, or that conquered you. But now, I know the truth. The ground isn't holding us. It's listening. Every word we speak down here, it goes not across the air, across time. You say a sentence, and you hear it again, days later, spoken by someone who's been dead for years, or worse, spoken by your own voice, coming from a direction you haven't walked yet. I tested it. I whispered something, just a simple phrase. We were never supposed to arrive. And then I waited. 3 nights later, I found it etched in frost on a piece of tin near the mess kit. Not scratched, etched, and below it, in the same handwriting I'd seen in Murray's journal. But you did. I'm no longer afraid of the trench. I'm afraid of the ground beneath it, because it's no longer still. It shifts deliberately. It breathes like lungs made of earth and marrow. And sometimes I feel it responding to me. When I think something terrible, it pulses. When I remember something painful, it hums, huh? And when I try to forget, okay, it gets louder. There's something deep below, not a creature, a structure, living, dreaming, composed of fragments, of uniforms, teeth, flags, confessions, coordinates. It's a recorder, and we're inside the tape. I began digging again, not to escape, to confirm what I feared, and I hit something metallic. A door, buried sideways, too large to be from any bunker I've known. When I touched it, it vibrated, not in sound, but in memory, images. A fire on a beach, a soldier whispering to a hole in the wall, children drawing spirals in chalk on a stone floor. A map with no borders, only veins. And then I heard my mother's voice, telling me to step back. And when I opened my eyes, I had already stepped forward. The door is opening itself now, slowly, in pulses, like a breath being held back for decades, finally being released. And I know, without doubt, it's not a door to a place. It's a door to a win. The ground isn't holding us. It's gathering, it's filtering, refining, tuning us to the same signal. And when the time is right, when the trench has enough names, enough pain, enough memory, it will speak back, not in words, but in fire. Because fire doesn't need fuel when it remembers what it was. And we We're just phrases waiting to be reburned. Only the dead. No, the coordinates, maps, no longer help me. I've torn every one of them apart. British, French, hand-drawn, etched in mud with blood and bone. They all tell the same lie, that this place is geographic. It's ISN. Single quotes. The trench isn't part of the world. There are no true directions anymore. North loops into west. East folds into memory. And south leads straight into voices that no longer need mouths. I stopped using the compass when the needle started pointing inward, and still the radio speaks. Even when I break it, even when I bury it, it returns. Sometimes in metal, sometimes in bone, sometimes in voices coming from the mud that sound like friends I've lost. A few nights ago, it said something new. Do not trust the sky. It belongs to the second fire. Then it gave me coordinates, numbers I didn't write down because they wrote themselves into my dreams. When I woke, I had drawn them in the dirt beside me, not with hands, with teeth. My gums were bleeding. The marks were deep, precise, and at the center of those coordinates, not a place, but a memory dot of me in a hospital bed, covered in burns, smiling at someone who wasn't there. That memory isn't mine, but it feels like it belongs to me anyway, like I borrowed it from a corpse, or it was inserted like a seed, and now it grows. Each time I try to forget it, the only ones who know the coordinates now are the dead. I found Finch's bones yesterday. Not all of them, just the jaw, and both femurs arranged like a compass pointing downward. His skull had been carved open, not shattered, carved delicately and inside. Folded paper, still dry, still legible. It said, Phase 3 failed. Memory leak continues. Phase 4 begins. At 66 meters. Dig through silence. Do not record the light. Let them believe it was war. Signed, Stern FOIA Directorate. Let them believe it was war. Let them believe it was bullets, borders, and bad orders. But this was never about empires. This was about access. Every war, every trench, every body left to rot is part of the map. Not to a location, to an opening. And now I'm standing at the edge of something deeper than earth, because the shaft is wider now, so wide I can see its walls spiraling downward like an inside-out cathedral. The mud around the lip pulses like muscle, and from the bottom, a new kind of light. Not golden, not fire, memory in visible form, and rising through it. Names of every man I saw die. Names of every man who never left this place, even when they were dragged out. And at the center of all those names, mine, etched on a plate of glass, floating upward like a warning or an invitation. And I know what it means now. The coordinates don't lead to somewhere. They wake something. And the dead, they remember how to navigate this place, because they built it, because they became it, and soon, so will I. The fire has a shape now. Fire wasn't supposed to have a shape. It was wild. It was hunger. It was memory undone. But now, seen it, and I know the fire remembers what it used to be. It doesn't crackle anymore. It breathes, not like lungs, but like lungs remembered. The flame rising from the shaft has edges, contours, veins. It pulses like a creature, waking up from 100-year sleep, a limb of history, reaching forward through the mud. Yesterday, I thought I saw a face in it, only for a second, in the curve of smoke, in the way the glow flickered red, then gold, then black. But it wasn't a human face. It was a symbol given eyes, spiral iris, mouth stitched into the shape of a triangle, skin made of overlapping uniforms, British, French, German, Russian, all fused together, all burned into one body. I backed away from the shaft, but my shadow stayed behind. I saw it clearly, split from my feet, still standing, still watching. And then it spoke, not with sound. With flame, it flickered into words. Words I didn't hear, I remembered. The fire was never light. It was language. Suddenly, I remembered something no man should remember. A phrase from before my birth, spoken in a chamber without doors, whispered into wet stone, sealed in blood. Stern fire, the flame that translates, the heat that records, the ash that repeats. I collapsed, not from pain, from recognition. I knew it wasn't the war that burned this place, not really. The explosions, the shelling, the gas, that was just permission. The fire was already here, buried, dormant, waiting for enough memory to catch spark, waiting for a match, waiting for us. And now it has shape, now it has voice, now it walks. It doesn't burn the trench anymore, it inhabits it. The walls glow with phrases I never spoke, but believed, names I never heard, but dreamed. One of them is mine, written in fire across the ceiling of the command dugout, burning without consuming. In the map I thought I'd lost. It's inside my skin now. When I press my palm against the dirt, I feel it unfold. Veins of memory, corridors of pain, vaults of screams, and at the center, the source, the original fire, the one they called the first match. It has a shape now, and is coming up, through me, through this trench, through every forgotten grave written off as friendly fire, or shell shock, because what they called madness was really just translation. We weren't broken, we were being rewritten. The fire is almost here, and when it arrives, it won't consume, it will speak, and the world will finally hear what war was trying to say all along. We weren't the first mouths. I used to think this was about us, our unit, our trench, our orders. I was wrong. We were just the current mouth, the fire that walks now, the one with my name written in smoke, the one that breathes through mud, and flame alike has spoken before. I can feel it. Each time I dream now, I fall through languages I've never studied. I see faces painted on stone, bleeding ink through time. I wake up knowing how to speak in tongues that no longer have alphabets, and I write, not in my notebook, not with my hands. I write with my breath. The mist I exhale each morning forms symbols. In the air, they hover, they shimmer, pinish, but I feel them leave something behind, like fingerprints on a window only the trench can see. Yesterday, I met another version of myself, not in a mirror, not in a dream. In the shaft, he was, wearing armor old, ancient, burned black, carved with triangles, spirals, and flame patterns. He had no eyes, just cavities filled with smoldering dust, and on his chest, a badge, not military, just a word, witness, K. He reached toward me, pressed his hand to my forehead. I didn't feel touch. I felt history. All at once. A child whispering to a flame inside a cave. Monks building a library from bone and ash. A plague doctor branding a door with a spiral, whispering it still breathes. It's a soldier from a war I don't recognize, holding a burnt book, crying. A woman wrapped in flags, screaming names into a fire that doesn't flicker, and in all of them, a presence, a listener, something collecting, recording, storing memory the way lungs stored breath before speech. I opened my eyes. The armored figure was gone, but on the wall of the shaft, I saw it, not a word, a wound, cut into stone, bleeding light, and, beneath it, scratched in dozens of languages, the same phrase. We weren't the first mouths. They spoke before us, fought before us, died before us. Each war, each uprising, each accident of history. Not random, but rhythmic, like syllables in a greater sentence, like lungs, learning how to shape speech through sacrifice and a trench. It's not a battlefield, it's a larynx. It vibrates, it resonates, It prepares the air, and we, those of us who die here, those who scream, those who remember too much, we're just practice. The fire doesn't want to burn, it wants to be understood, and when it finds the perfect mouth, the one shaped by enough war, enough silence, enough broken memory, it will speak its first true word, and the world will change, not by flame, but by comprehension. When memory burns, it doesn't die, it spreads. They told us, memory fades, that war scars the mind, okay, and the brain tries to bury what it can't handle. But here, in this trench, under this sky that never brightens, I've learned the opposite. Memory doesn't die. When it burns, it spreads. It gets hot, it gets sharp, it leaves the person who lived it and enters others. I feel things I never experienced. I dream of last breaths I never took. I remember wars I wasn't born for. I recall screams and tongues I've never heard. And worst of all, I know I'm not the only one down here remembering things that aren't theirs. The trench is full of them. Men repeating phrases they've never read, writing numbers into the mud, drawing spirals with fingers that don't tremble anymore. Some are alive, most are not, but all are speaking. I passed a soldier last night, half his face gone, ribcage open like a book. His hand kept moving, drawing something in the dirt beside his body. A single phrase, again, again. Remembering is how the fire breathes. I whispered it to myself immediately. I felt something stir in the walls of the trench. Not move, stir, like someone listening too closely. The mud got warm again. My skin, it ched. My tongue felt swollen with someone else's words. And when I spoke, allowed that air tasted like salt and ash. This is how it happens. This is how it's always happened. Not through books, not through speeches, not through monuments, but through memory ignited, burned, warped, replanted. Because when you remember something so vividly, it hurts. You become its match. That's why the fire doesn't kill. It transfers from soldier to ground, from ground to smoke, from smoke to dream, from dream to voice. And when that voice finally says the right name in the right place at the right time, fire moves, not with wind, with intention. They tried to contain it. They gave it names like combat stress and shell shock. They sent men home and called them mad, but they weren't mad. They were carriers. And when they whispered in their sleep, when they burned letters they couldn't bear to reread, when they stared too long at empty corners of a quiet room, that was the fire, still burning, still breathing, still spreading. And I think I'm already lit. I feel it in my chest, in my fingertips, in the teeth that ache when I hear old songs. In the words I wake up already writing in blood and breath. I'm no longer afraid of the flame. I'm afraid of what it wants me to say. Because once I say it, it's no unburning the world. The first word wasn't spoken, it was survived. There are no more voices now, it's only vibrations. The air hums like it's waiting. The trench feels tight, as if holding breath. The fire watches me, not with eyes, but through recognition, like it remembers something about me I haven't learned yet. And every step I take feels pre-scripted. I tried to write again today. The notebook won't accept ink. The pages blur and twist. Words rearrange themselves into shapes I can't unsee, but my skin writes just fine. My left forearm is now covered in phrases I didn't etch. Some are backwards, others upside down. It's all of them hot to the touch. I ran my fingers over the largest line. It burned under my thumb, and I heard a sound, a gasp, not mine, like someone, somewhere, just realized they remembered dying. That's when I understood. The first word wasn't spoken, it was endured. It lived through a wound, so deep that sound couldn't form. And when the pain was too vast for screams, that was the moment language was born. Survivor's silence. That was the first syllable. We keep thinking fire is destruction. But no, the flame is recording every death in this trench. Every betrayal, every unspoken apology, every coward's last breath, it's all being written into the fire. And when it has enough story, it will speak again. This time, clearly, I've stopped sleeping. Dreams have become too literal, not symbolic, it's literal. I walk into a hallway, open a door, and find a version of myself, curled up, hands on ears, chanting coordinates each night. The number gets shorter. Each night, he stops chanting and begins screaming. Last night, I opened the door. He was gone, just a shadow on the floor, and a phrase carved into the wall with broken fingernails. The last word will not be spoken. I.T. will be released. The trench is changing shape again. Now it coils inward. The spiral isn't wide anymore, it's descending. Each turn tighter, each chamber smaller, till I'm crawling. The air is thick with names I haven't said yet. Names I will scream, not from choice, but because I've become the match. I've reached the bottom of the shaft today, not the real bottom. I doubt it ever ends, but something changed there. No more walls, just mud, glowing with script, thousands of phrases dancing across the surface like fireflies made of regret. They lit my face, and I recognized some. Why didn't I pull him back? It wasn't supposed to be this real. I saw the flare. I lied. I wrote the order. I signed it with my father's name. Forgive me, Mary. The fire doesn't want worship. It wants honesty, and that's the one thing war never leaves intact. When I finally speak the word it's given me, it won't sound like a word. It'll sound like a scream, a confession, a history so heavy it burns clean through the throat. And when that happens, I won't be alone, because I'm not the first, and I won't be the last. The war wasn't fought for land. It was for a mouth big enough to speak. We were told the war was about land. Lines on a map, resources, tactics. But I've walked every inch of this trench, and I've seen what lies beneath it. And I understand now, this war, all of them, really, were never about land. They were about building a mouth. A trench isn't a defense. It's a jaw. Mud isn't earth. It's flesh, each fallen soldier. A tooth, each order whispered from a trembling mouth. A nerve. They weren't burying men. They were shaping vows, what we call history. All those wars, massacres, secret operations, silences, they were pieces, consonants, fractured syllables, being assembled across centuries into a single sentence that no living language could hold. We were never here to survive. We were here to complete the mouth. That's why the spiral never ends. It tightens, it consumes, it curves toward the throat. And the deeper I go, the more the air vibrates with a sound I can't hear, but understand anyway. It's a sound without pitch, without tone, but full of meaning, so dense, splits my thoughts like wet wood. I saw the mouth yesterday, not all of it, just its edge. Curved trench, dug perfectly, lined with bone and rusted rifles. It breathed, and I knew. This is what the fire had waited for, not belief, not devotion, structure, resonance, a throat wide enough to carry something ancient back into the world. They thought they could silence it with medals and memorials. They thought forgetting would be enough. But the fire doesn't need memory. It only needs rhythm, and war always provides. Murray's voice returned this morning, not from the radio. Not from memory, from inside me. I opened my mouth and his voice came out. It's ready now. We shaped the vowels with our deaths, the consonants with our lies, and the silence with our guilt. I tried to scream, but only fire came out. Not burning, speaking. I fell to my knees. The trench shook, the walls bled steam, and I felt it, a tongue beneath me, rising, coiling, ancient, made of flags, made of treaties, made of regrets. And for a moment, I understood. The war was a story. The soldiers were punctuation, okay? And the fire was the author. Now the mouth is opening. The sentence is ready, okay? And I am the last syllable when it speaks. Will anyone even recognize the world that comes after? Or will we wake up inside the word as part of it? No one was supposed to hear the whole sentence. I was never supposed to make it this far. Not past the spiral, not past the shaft, not beyond the breath of the fire, and certainly not to the place where the trench ends, not with a wall, but with a mouth made of silence. It doesn't speak, not yet. It vibrates like it's waiting for a final piece, a final word, a final name, and I know it's mine. I've seen what happens to the others who got too close. Their faces don't burn. They erase. Their names disappear from dog tags. Letters vanish from journals. Their reflections blur in frozen puddles. And worst of all, their memories migrate into others. Into me, into the mud. The fire is not punishing us. It's protecting the sentence, because no one was supposed to hear it whole. Not even those who built it. Not even those who burned for it. Especially not them. I sat in the center of the trench today. Everything was still. Then I blinked, and all the walls around me had shifted. New symbols, new names, all in the same pattern. Don't finish the sentence. It was scrawled in ash, etched in bone, sewn into sleeves. One of the corpses had it carved into his teeth. Another had it tattooed beneath his eyelids. But I kept walking, and now I understand it's not about hearing the sentence. It's about becoming it. Each war was a syllable, each scream a vowel, each betrayal a comma, each silence a space, each survivor an unfinished clause. And I'm the period. That's why it let me live. That's why I wasn't hit when Harker fell. Why the gas never reached me. Why the shaft never swallowed me. I was always meant to make it here. To listen, to speak, to close what was started centuries ago. But now that I feel it on my tongue, I know why no one was supposed to hear the whole sentence. Because it's not a message, it's a door. And when it's spoken in full, not in sound, but in understanding, it opens, not to a place, not to a hell, not even to another world. It opens to what's been waiting. What war was designed to distract us from what silence tried to seal, what fire could never fully consume. And I'm seconds from speaking it. My lips tremble with the shape of the final word. The trench pulses around me, and the fire, it leans close, like a teacher, like a parent, like something so ancient. It no longer waits to be worshipped, only repeated. And just before I speak, I hear one last voice, not mine. Don't let it finish. Once it's said, there is no more saying, only becoming. And then the fire spoke. It wasn't a word like I imagined. It wasn't a name, or a curse, or a language I didn't know. It was everything all at once, and too slowly. When I spoke the final syllable, the trench didn't shake. It stopped. Time froze, not in silence, but in anticipation. And then the fire leaned in, and it used me. I didn't feel possessed. I felt aligned, as if every memory I've ever had, every wound, every lie, every breath had finally been put in the correct order. I became the sentence, and the fire, it used my mouth to speak the sentence into the world. What came out wasn't sound. It was understanding, immediate, unstoppable, irreversible, and it hit the trench like a wave of recognition. The ground remembered. The mud tensed. The bodies rose, not with life, but with comprehension. Their mouths opened, no lungs moved. But the sentence spread from one corpse to another, from one name to another, and above us, the sky caught fire without flame. Clouds didn't burn. They peeled back like paper to soak with blood to hold ink anymore. And behind them, not stars, symbols, moving, not orbiting, reading. The trench walls glowed, not with light, but with presence. Like something had been watching for centuries and was finally acknowledged. And all around me, I heard a sound I can't describe, except to say it felt like a library, gasping. Every truth, every forgotten scream, every buried war crime, every name removed from a report. They came back, not to accuse, not to punish, but to join. This was never about justice. It was about completion. And once the fire finished speaking, once its sentence was fully known, stopped burning because it didn't need to anymore. It had been heard, and in that moment, I felt it. Relief. The trench collapsed inward, not as destruction, but as exhale. The mud folded like paper. The shaft sealed like a scar. And I remained, not alive, not dead, written. I am not a soldier anymore. I am not a name. I am not a man with stories. I am a syllable, preserved in the breath of history so that the fire, we never have to scream again. And if you're reading this, if somehow these pages made it out, then no, it wasn't a war. It was a sentence, and we were all just letters, waiting to be spoken. Our voice matters here. This story wasn't just written, it was remembered. Now, I want to hear what it awakened in you. Was there a moment that hit too close? A phrase that felt familiar, like you've read it before, but never knew where? Drop your thoughts in the comments. No matter how strange, emotional, or silent it feels, I'm reading everything, okay? And I will personally respond to each one. We are not alone in what we carry, okay? And sometimes sharing it is the only way to stop it from burning. Let's speak together.